Hello, friends, and welcome. My name is Mike McMahon, and I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society, and it is my pleasure today uh, to be with another Executive Director of the Hymn Society, my immediate predecessor, Jan Kraybill. Um, some of you may know Jan as a Grammy-nominated concert artist, speaker, and advocate for the power of music to change lives for the better. She's performed as a soloist, as a collaborative musician, and as a hymn festival designer and leader across the US and Canada and all over the world. Um, she's the Organist-in-Residence at Community of Christ, and she's the organ curator at the Kauffman Center for the Performing Arts in Kansas City. She's a busy person and has done a lot of really interesting things over the years. And I'm just really just delighted to be here to have this conversation. So welcome, Jan. It's good to be with you.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's good to talk to you.
Thanks. So I wonder if we could start at the beginning, how did you get into all this? I mean, when you were growing up, how did you get interested in music and church and, all of that, the organ?
So I think I've always been a musician. I mean, I remember when I was 3 years old, my parents bought a piano, and I remember very clearly it coming into the front door of our ranch home, not on a ranch, but ranch style home. And I just remember thinking it was so beautiful, just the wood of it. And then my mom saying, "You're not allowed to touch it until I teach you how to. This is not a toy. This is something to be taken seriously." And so the next day, then she showed me where middle C was. And so my mom was my first teacher. And then my parents were my introduction to church. So I think I've always been a churchgoer because my family that's what we did. So in Western Kansas, a small town called Colby is Colby Presbyterian Church, and that's where we belonged. My dad was on the session and later moderator of the presbytery, so he was a very active volunteer in the church, as well as being an architect by profession. But also, he was a musician, and so he absolutely loved to sing. He was an upright bass player in our community orchestra. So all of that combined to get me into music and into church, which without really my having any say in it or thinking about it, but it was a happy match. I really loved music and I loved going to church and I loved watching my dad sing in the choir. And when I got old enough to read, my mom would put the hymnal, prop it up on the back of the pew as we were standing to sing, and she would point at the words of the hymn to me, even though I didn't really know what I was looking at theologically, of course, but she helped me to realize that hymns were poetry and that the words were important. So all of that got me into church music.
Wow, cool. So did you like sing in the choir or play for church?
Yeah, in our small church, we had a youth choir. I sang in that. I played in church every once in a while. I was quite shy as a kid, and so for me to play in church was a big deal. And we had a lovely couple named Vaughn and Velma Lippold. And Vaughn was the director of the choir, the adult choir and the youth choir. And Velma was the accompanist at any keyboard instrument, but particularly organ was interesting to me in my case. And so they just grew us up, all of us youth in Colby Presbyterian Church, and grew us up theologically and musically. And they were so enthusiastic and so excellent at what they did. And of course, as a kid, I thought everybody had that. And then when I grew up, I realized that that was truly a gift to have in a small town in Western Kansas, in a small church, to have that level of expertise and enthusiasm for the work of church music. It
Well,
truly was a gift. I'm so grateful to them. So when I was 14, Velma, who had invited me to play piano a lot in church, said, "Would you like to have some organ lessons?" And that set me on a path that I really, again, I didn't choose, but I'm so grateful for. She taught me my first lessons and kind of helped me to appreciate what an organist can do, how much power an organist has to either encourage or discourage congregational singing. She was a wonderful example and a great mentor, great teacher.
wow, that's so wonderful. What a blessing that must have been.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you also do music in school?
I did, yeah. So we had a great music department in our public school. We had piano lessons during the school day. We had other lessons as well. Other schools had that, but we were one of very few schools that you could, leave social studies and go for your 20-minute piano lesson. And then when I got older, I got 40 minutes of piano lesson. But
Oh,
bless that teacher. And Shirley Malcolm was her name. And she taught 20 or 40-minute lessons for the entire school day from 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. She taught lessons at the school, which meant that I also learned how to accompany at the school, because when the choir needed an accompanist, it wasn't just one of us showing up, it was one of us showing up with our teacher, Mrs. Malcolm, to give us pointers about the differences between making solo music and making collaborative music. So I was so fortunate. I'm just so grateful for all of that upbringing.
it says a lot about music education, doesn't it?
Oh
And
yes.
with a
Yes. And
lot.
unfortunately, those piano lessons don't exist anymore at Colby High School or Colby Public Schools, but
Yeah.
they did when I was young.
And did you start playing the organ in church too?
I did, but very slowly. So God bless Velma Lippold. So as I said, was very shy. It was okay for me to play piano in church because basically people talked over it, and I never had to play a hymn. It was just play the prelude or the offertory or the postlude. But when I started on organ, of course, hymn playing was a big part of that. And I was scared to death because hymns are not easy for a beginning organist. So for months, Velma would have me play only the prelude and the first hymn, and she would play the whole rest of the service. And then I graduated to maybe prelude, first hymn, offertory, but not the doxology. That's too scary. So oh my goodness, she just shepherded me. And I think it must have been until I was probably 17 before I played an entire service and she actually got a Sunday off. So it was a long haul for her, and a long haul for me too,
Yeah.
and the normal frustrations, getting your feet to work either in conjunction, parallel with your hands or not, was a hard thing to have happen. But I remember so clearly the day that I showed up at the church to practice. The church was within walking distance of our school, and so I would just go over after school and practice. And I was really struggling with feet and hands together. And then all of a sudden, it was like a click happened in my brain. I mean, seriously, I think I heard an audible click. And all of a sudden, my brain said, "Oh, you need to keep track of four things at once instead of two things at once. Okay, we'll do that." And then, I mean, I can't say it was a piece of cake after that. It's still not a piece of cake, but it was truly not so much a coordination effort, it was a brain thing. So I always hope for that in students. Always hope that they will have that moment of epiphany when things make sense.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's funny how people sometimes say, "Oh, you have such a gift." It's like, yeah, what they don't realize is that you were going over there after school day after day after day after day after day. Uh,
Yeah, and still, so I'll play a concert someplace these days and people will say, "Oh, I wish I could play like you." Well, you can if you work at it. Yeah, I mean, truly, I truly believe that really anybody could play like I play. um so so it's just you choose in life what you want to work at. And so, if you're an excellent accountant, then I'm sure that probably the first thing you look at on your online news is something mathematical. Well, that's not my case at all. My mom was a math teacher and she's retired now, but she still sends me math puzzles. And I know they're fascinating to her, and I try to make them fascinating to me. But if it was a musical puzzle, it would be more fascinating. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, I can see it. So did you then go to college and pursue music in college?
I did. So I needed to go to a Kansas school because I needed that break financially. And so I auditioned at all of the schools in Kansas, and Kansas State University gave me a good scholarship, several good scholarships. At the time, I was a vocalist, I was a French horn player, and I was a pianist.
Wow.
Um, I was an organist as well, but I didn't. It's interesting. This is in the days before the internet, right? So people who are younger than I am, you got to imagine a day. um, I I didn't I didn't consider the organ as a career pursuit because I didn't see that modeled in my small town. So Velma also taught at the college. Every church musician that I knew, they did that part-time, and then they were also a second grade teacher or a librarian, or in the case of Vaughn, he also taught at the college. We had a small community college in Colby. So I didn't see pursuing the organ as a career move then. That changed, but then I didn't. So I went to Kansas State University on 3 scholarships and became a very, very busy student. I remember at the time there was a professor that said, "You're busy now, and the lifestyle that you're establishing right now, this level of busyness, is what you will do for the rest of your life." And I said, "No, it's not. No, it's as soon as I graduate, I'll stop." Well, now I look at my life now and I know that he was right.
For
So
sure.
did 2 degrees, bachelor's in music education, and then a master's in piano performance at K-State. Then I needed to get a job, and so I taught public school for all of 1 year. My mom had taught public school for, many, many decades. I thought I was going to be like her. It turned out that that is not my calling. I tried really hard for a year, but that was definitely not my calling. I went into freelance music at that point. And worked for about 10 years. During that time, I got hired as principal organist at Community of Christ. By that point, I had seen the light and gone into organ. No, I do enjoy playing the piano as well still. And so I do both in church. Sometimes I do multiple, I do concerts that are half and half concerts, half on piano, half on organ. Anyway, I still enjoy playing the piano, but worked for about 10 years, then went back for my doctorate at the Conservatory of Music here in Kansas City, associated with the University of Missouri school systems. And so got my doctorate in organ and have been going on with that ever since.
So you did you start your doctorate after you started Community of Christ?
I started it before I started at Community of Christ. So at the time, we can talk about this if we have time. I worked for a pharmaceutical company for a while. So at the time I was working in pharmaceuticals, and I decided, well, Stephen Covey, this well-known organizational expert, Stephen Covey says that before you start climbing a ladder, make sure it's leaning against the right wall. I was climbing a ladder and doing really well. I eventually became the head of research and development publishing at this pharmaceutical company that was then called Marion Merrill Dow. Anyway, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm climbing a ladder that isn't a ladder that I intended to climb, and it wasn't my passion. So I quit there to start work on my doctorate, and I was a full-time student with the wonderful support of my husband, because all of a sudden a lot of financial income was outgo. So anyway, I got my doctorate then, and in the middle of the doctorate degree, Community of Christ hired me as their principal organist, succeeding John Obetz, who was a wonderful mentor and friend. I miss him so much.
Wow, but what a worthy successor to John Obetz.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't feel it at the time, but
Mhm.
I grew into the position, as they say.
Yeah, and so well. I mean, I think that ladder led you right up to where you belong, right?
That's what I feel, that I started climbing the right ladder then. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship to congregational song through all this history of development in your career path.
Yeah, so I have always known, mostly because of my mom with that hymnal in the back of the pew pointing out the words, I've known that congregational song is about poetry. And I value that poetry. And whenever I play, I want congregations to value the richness of the words that they are singing. So that grew, and then through Velma's help and through Vaughn's help, and then when I went to college, I didn't major in organ in my first 2 degrees, but Mary Ellen Sutton was the organist at Kansas State University, and she helped me to be a better organist at the church job that I had. I always was playing for church on Sundays, and so she helped me to become a better organist, a better hymn player. But then when I got through the audition process and was chosen as the principal organist at Community of Christ, It's a small denomination, but they love to sing. They love, love, love to sing. And it was transformational for me as an organist, leading them in singing from the organ. Um, they if there are 12 people at a Community of Christ small church, they're singing in parts, and they're singing with gusto, and they're singing with understanding, and they got me to the hymn society. So my very first day at work, they said, my coworkers in the worship office said, you have to go to hymn society. I had never heard of hymn society. This is too much of a common refrain for in the entire world of church music. It's too bad that more people don't know about the hymn society. That was certainly my case. So they took me to my first conference, which was summer of 1999 in Vancouver. At the time, I thought, why am I going to this? There's not a single organ. I looked at the schedule. There's not a single organ on the schedule. We're meeting in a place that doesn't have an organ. It's called the First Nations Longhouse. Why would I? This is not going to help me be a better organist. Oh my gosh. That conference was life-changing. It was life-changing. One of the things that happened was on a sidewalk on the way to the First Nations Longhouse on some morning, Sue Mitchell-Wallace, who was revered by me as an organist and as an instructor, she welcomed me to the hymn society. And I was used to going to conferences that there were tiers of people. And I was bottom tier, unknown organist, and Sue Mitchell-Wallace was, in my mind, way up here. And I couldn't believe it that she welcomed me so warmly. And then, of course, sitting in a conference room, and someone sits next to you, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, that's Paul Westermeyer. Oh my God. It's that kind of experience that got me hooked into hymn society. And then hymn society shaped me not only as an organist, but as a leader of congregational song. So I, previous to my hymn society experience, would have never stepped in front of a group of people without having the safety net of a piano or organ by me, in between me and them. Right. Them being this group of people that I was scared of, right? And I learned through hymn society how to be a leader without that crutch. I learned that my voice, which I don't think is all that strong, can be strong enough to lead people in enthusiastic singing. So anyway, that was a long answer to a short question, but that's my path into congregational song and congregational leadership of song.
That's really an interesting story, because it seems like the 1999 conference was a turning point for the Hymn Society as well. And to hear your perspective on it, I think is quite fascinating. I mean, you sort of went sounds like a little reluctantly to something you didn't think was going to be relevant. And
yes, I really was looking at it from a very narrow viewpoint, both of my own skills as an organist. So I wanted to become a better organist. And then also my view of congregational song. So I didn't realize that conference was so groundbreaking for the Hymn Society in general. I had never heard of the Hymn Society, but to have Patrick Metzen-Kanyiri and Pablo Sosa and Ito Lo all there, and I'm learning from them. And then the leader of morning song was Mary Oyer. My goodness, I still have my notes from that conference, and I still refer to them. It was just life-changing. I can't tell you how much.
Well, could you say a little bit more about then how that led you to do maybe some things you never thought you would do? Because you said you always had yours. I mean, a desk is a barrier between you and it, but organ even more so, right? So yeah. Tell me some of the things you've done that you never dreamed you would do as a leader of congregational song.
So, for instance, Pablo Sosa, that conference taught us. I'm trying to think of the Spanish title, and I can't think of it. But If You Only Have Faith, it's a mustard seed song, and he taught it to us without benefit of any instrument, just with his voice. Mary Oyer got us singing in ways that I had never considered before. So having the men sing a drone while the women sing the melody above them, it had never occurred to me before to do that, or to do it. I mean, I would have done it on the organ with a pedal tone, but I never would have trusted a congregation to be able to do that, especially with my leadership, which I consider to be very poor, without the organ or the piano. Now I've taught congregational singing in Tahiti, and I've taught them lots and lots of different languages because I can now, not because I'm expert in any of those languages, but I can at least teach one song in something like, I don't know, any language. I can at least get that far, and I'm not embarrassed. John Bell once said, not in that conference, but in a later Hymn Society conference, he once said that his strength lies in the weakness of his voice. And I don't consider his voice to be weak, but he does. And I consider my voice to be weak. And he says that people are more likely to follow him because he has a voice more like theirs. So every singer in a congregation is an amateur singer. And so if you come at them with a perfect voice, sometimes that discourages them from singing because they can't be perfect like you are. But if you come at them with an amateur's voice, he says they'll sing louder to drown you out. I don't know if that's true. But at least it can become a strength instead of a weakness. And so Hymn Society taught me that as well.
So how do you apply those principles when you lead a congregation from the organ?
So now I have translated that into organ language. So most specifically in text, when I approach a hymn, the first thing I do before I'm ever at the instrument is I am underlining moments in the text that I want to be especially meaningful to them. And then when I get to my instrument, I'm going to try to figure out through registrations or through what I do. I remember what John Ferguson taught once in a Hymn Society conference. He says that what's on the page is a vocal transcription. So you are reading in a hymnal the choral parts, but just as in any choral anthem, the keyboardist does not have to play every one of those choral parts. And so with my underlined words, I go to my instrument, piano or organ, and I try to figure out how to illustrate those words. Not so that the congregation will quit singing, but so that they will sing with more understanding, more gusto, more passion, because they realize what they're singing about.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It's so cool. So I've got to mention another name, Sue Mitchell-Wallace, who I've already mentioned. She played for a conference once. I don't remember which conference, but the hymn was Touch the Earth Lightly, text by Shirley Arena Murray. And the way Sue illustrated the part of the text that talks about us destroying the earth, intentionally destroying the earth, she came up with such an ugly organ sound, but it was perfect for the text. It was perfect. And I have played that hymn that way ever since. So, all these things, all these techniques that I have just absorbed and maybe stolen from all of these people that come together at these conferences have been so valuable to me in ways that I never could have imagined.
So I have to say, you piqued my curiosity when you talked about Tahiti. And I wonder if you could say more about that experience. That sounds like a really amazing memory.
Yeah, it was. I've gotten to go so many places just because I'm a leader of congregational song, a designer of hymn festivals, or an organist or a pianist. I've got the doors that have opened for me have been amazing. So I've been to Tahiti twice. Tahitians absolutely love to sing, intergenerationally love to sing. But one of the things that I was told before I went to Tahiti the first time was, don't bring any handouts, like pieces of paper. Don't bring any pieces of paper. We're not going to project the words. We're not going to project any music. Everything here is taught by rote. And I thought, okay, I can do that. But wow, what an inefficient way to learn. Oh, these poor people. Well, how ethnocentric was I? Oh my goodness. So I got there. My assignment the first trip was to teach from this new hymnal. So I've been on an editorial team of a hymnal called Community of Christ Sings. And my assignment was to teach from the new hymnal. It was before the hymnal had been released, but we wanted to kind of pre-teach things so that people would embrace the new hymnal. And my assignment was to teach 2 hours every night. Okay, so I taught by rote the first night some things in different languages and, different melodies. And then the next night, I went back thinking, okay, I should review. So for an American audience, if I had taught stuff by rote the first night, the second night, nobody would remember anything. I'd have to review all this stuff. All right, so I said at the beginning of the second night, you might remember this song that I taught you last night. I don't remember what language it was in, but it certainly wasn't their language. And I said, so I'll sing part of it and you sing part of it back to me. And before I had completed the first phrase, they were singing it back to me in improvised parts because I hadn't taught them any parts. I had taught them only the melody. They were improvising harmonies back to me perfectly. And it's then when I realized, oh, if you learn this way all the time, you're really good at learning this way. Oh my gosh, they were so good. So the third night, so this is at the end of the third night, after 6 hours of teaching, I had taught them everything I brought, every single thing I brought to teach them. The fourth night, I said to them, okay, we're going to review. And night number 5, we're going to have a concert. And we are going to be the performers and the audience. Because you now know everything I brought. I can't believe how fast you learned. This is fantastic. So the fourth night, Thursday night, we reviewed everything. And then I said, invite your friends if you want to, invite neighbors, The place was packed. Everybody was so enthusiastic and they are singing. By that point, I had lost my voice trying to match their enthusiasm. I could barely whisper, but it didn't matter because they sang with such gusto. I will never forget that first experience. And it truly, like all congregational singing, if it's done well, it broadens your horizons. It broadens your horizons of what you think congregational singing is like, what you think church is like, what you think God is like. And boy, that trip, it was amazing. It was amazing. I couldn't wait to go back.
What a great story. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you shared that with us. So you mentioned that it was 1999 that you went to your first Hymn Society conference, and I did you keep going after that to?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I couldn't miss one then. I was so hooked. I was so very hooked. So yeah, conference after conference I attended, and only had to stop doing that very, very recently. And it was only because of economic things. So very recently, just before COVID, I became a totally freelance musician. And that was bad timing on my part. So it was difficult for me to afford to attend the number of conferences that I had in the summertime. So, but I'm very much looking forward to Atlanta this year. Can't wait.
Well, that's going to be cool. I know you also got involved in Hymn Society leadership. You served on the executive committee, right?
I did. Yeah. I was
So,
invited to do that by another, I'm just such a huge fan of hymn authors and composers. So Mary Louise Bringle was the president of Hymn Society at the time. And so getting a call from Mel Bringle asking me to do something, I would never have said no to Mel Bringle. And it's not that I wanted to say no, but it was just such an honor to get a call from her and ask me to serve on the executive committee. So I did that as a member at large, and got to serve under John Thordberg as president later on, and Jackie Jones. Yeah, it was such a pleasure.
so you were on the executive committee during another big point of transition, right? When with the decision to establish the Center for Congregational Song and all that, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that dreaming session in the Winnipeg conference, we knew we wanted to expand Hymn Society, but we didn't know exactly how we wanted to do that. And so the members gathered there, and then later on a wider survey of membership that wasn't able to attend that conference that helped us dream. And that was wonderful to have that collection of brains together trying to figure out what to do. And that ended up in the establishment of the Center for Congregational Song and the hiring of Brian Hayne. And now look where we are. I mean, it's so neat to to think about the dreams, and then the reality is so much better than we had dreamed. So kudos to Brian Hayne.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm wondering what it was like to kind of participate at that level and, to be in those kinds of reflections about where we are and where we're going to go and all that. Can you say a little more?
Yeah, I mean, it was very inspirational. It was also, as anybody who's served on a nonprofit executive committee, it's also difficult because the reality of money always curtails what you can dream about. Maybe it doesn't curtail the dreams, but then when you get right down to it, you have to make very difficult decisions about which direction you're going to go with the funds that you have. But I've also witnessed extraordinary generosity to the Hymn Society. So there are lots and lots of people who truly believe in the mission of the Hymn Society in the greater world and the ability of music to change lives. And that was amazingly inspirational to witness, that people really would invest in that.
So that's an interesting point because it seems to me that that period also is a time when the Hymn Society decided to embrace what John Thornburg often says, that there's to break that myth that all church musicians are poor as church mice, and therefore there's no way we're ever going to be able to do anything really significant because we're never going to be able to afford it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know Mel has talked about how her own thinking about that was transformed by that process. I wonder what that was like for the executive committee to sort of work their way through that, to sort of decide we're going to go for it and try to raise a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were parts of it that were scary, really, really scary. And then for me, there was always the regret that I couldn't financially be that person that would say, okay, here you go.
Right.
um, it's difficult to ask for money, at least for me. It's difficult to do that. And so I had to learn kind of to get over that, especially when I was executive director. That was one of the big challenges for me in that role. And it's not that I was unfamiliar with it. I had come from an organization called the Dome and Spire Organ Foundation, and we had raised a lot of money for organ maintenance and organ programming at Community of Christ. So I wasn't unfamiliar with it, but I can't say it ever quite got comfortable to do, and maybe we'll never get comfortable to do. I would much rather be the one giving the money. But I remember one glorious day when I was executive director, opening the mail. I had visited a donor in Texas. I was hoping for a donation, and then what actually came was half again more than we had asked for. And I was at our post office box, opening the mail, discarding the junk mail. I opened this one and I actually screamed in the middle of the post office. And people said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, the best news. I just got the best news." It was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, it is really amazing. I know exactly what you're saying. The experience of the generosity of people is just really incredibly moving and affirming and exciting.
Yes. And what I loved doing, I hated asking for money, but I loved thanking people. I writing those letters, and at the time it was paper letters. I don't know what it is now, but it was lovely to write to those individuals and express my extreme gratitude and my assurance to them that the money would be used to truly change lives, because I truly believe that music can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that your time as executive director, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how that all happened and what that journey was like getting into that.
Sure. So Deb Carlton Loftus was my predecessor. Carl Daw was her predecessor. I knew both of them, respected both of them so much, and never ever dreamed that I would be in such a position. But when the position was advertised, I kind of saw myself in it. And so I applied thinking, okay, they'll get hundreds of applications, and it was just an exercise for me in dreaming a little bit. And the thing is, Hymn Society, from the very first moment, it was clear that this was my tribe. These were my people. So I was interested in contributing to the growth of that tribe. Um, and ended up being asked to interview and I think we did a phone interview first, and then I went to Dallas and we interviewed in person. To my surprise, I was chosen to be the executive director. And one of the things that appealed to me about it was advertised as a 3/4 time position. I wasn't interested in giving up my performing career yet. Still am not. And so I was transitioning from a full-time position and thought, well, 3/4 time will be perfect because I'll be able to do that and still keep my performances going. What I miscalculated was the rapid growth of the Hymn Society at the time and the amount of transition that was needed. So we had a full-time employee, Brian Hain, who was going like gangbusters getting this Center for Congregational Song open. It launched in the first fall of my time as executive director. So that was going. For the first time, we had a truly geographically distributed staff. So Courtney Murtaugh, who was wonderful, and she was overseeing all of our financial things as well as conference planning. And Courtney and Brian were doing conference planning together. Anyway, so Courtney was in Chicago. Brian at the time was in Dallas, and then he moved to the East Coast. So figuring that out technologically and just practically, how do you do staff meetings when no one is with you? And then figuring out the growing needs of the Hymn Society. So we had members now that were from lots of different walks of life. And not that that wasn't the case before, but the expansion of what congregational song means, it meant that all of those people now had slightly different needs, slightly different, I'll say, pastoral care, lots of phone calls from Hymn Society members that had been longtime members that were afraid that the Hymn Society was changing too much for them, and then Hymn Society members that were new that were afraid that Hymn Society was too set in their ways. So there was lots of that. There were the donor visits and calls that I mentioned. Anyway, it was like drinking from a fire hose. And then I realized that Deb Carlton Loftus, who is a wonderful person, but if you ask her how many hours she worked in the position, she'd say, I'd probably, a little more than the half-time position that it was at the time, but, not much more. Then you talk to her husband and he'll say, I never saw her doing those years. She's an amazingly energetic person, but she was not working half-time.
Right.
All right. So I soon learned that it was not possible to do this in 3/4 time. But my performance career wasn't letting go, and I didn't want to let go of it. And so it soon became clear that a full-time employee like Brian, with lots of creative impulses and needs and just ideas that he wanted to bounce off of people, the Hymn Society needed a full-time executive director. And so from that point, when I realized that, it was painful for me to realize, but luckily I was old enough to have come to the following conclusion about change. When you see a huge wave of change happening, I think it's your responsibility and just need to either surf that wave or get out of the way. And I really thought that it would be best for the society for me to pave the way for a full-time executive director, both pave the way with the executive committee to say, yes, we can afford this, and then to design the position to be more like what I thought the Hymn Society needed. Now you can tell me whether I was right or not. Whatever we designed for you and handed to you, I hope it was helpful. But that was my intent, was just to pave the way for someone who could devote full time and more to this.
Well, no, I think your vision is proven to be totally on target because I think the staff, as it's configured today, allows us to do the kinds of things you're talking about, to take care of all those various components that are part of it, and also just to kind of ride the wave, because there's been a big wave in the years since then as well.
Yes, and some of that by design and some of that by COVID. So
Exactly.
when you guys pivoted that first conference to be a digital conference rather than an in-person conference, I was so proud of you all, just because I cannot imagine behind the scenes what that took. But wow, it was amazing what you designed and very effective. And of course, that changed how conferences are done now. As you know, the whole world has changed now because of COVID. But the groundwork that you laid under intense time pressure really, I think, has paid off very well.
But I think that you alluded to something that helped to pave the way for it even back when you were executive director, and that is finding a way for the staff to function together even though they were distributed. So we already had in place, by the time I arrived, an effective way of working together as a team, even though we weren't in the same geographical location. So when COVID came along, we were veterans of Zoom, and so it was not really a big leap for us to kind of move the whole society into relating through Zoom. And it was an amazing gift what you bequeathed to us. And
well, good. I'm glad to know that, because of course, in many ways, having been preceded by Tom Smith, Carl Daw, Deb, and then I lasted a bit over a year. And they had all been in the position for many, many years, decades in some cases. So in many ways, it felt like a failure. But I am glad that I truly believe that I was a transitional person. And I'm glad that what I was able to do was helpful to you. And I hope that you stay in the position for decades.
Well, we'll see.
No pressure.
Thank you. That's very, very nice of you to say.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. I truly do. And I wouldn't just say that. I mean, I truly do. Yeah, all of you are.
Appreciate that. I mean, this team is very good, very good. It's a really wonderful, wonderful working relationship that we have with each other.
Good. I'm glad.
And grateful for you, grateful for all that you've brought over the years, not only as executive director, but I also recall in 2019, being in Dallas, being at the Meyerson Symphony Hall, and certainly one of the most memorable musical experiences of my life, when we all were singing together with you, leading us from the organ in that hall. You sort of did what you talked about earlier in terms of the way that you led us and helped us to relate to the hymns that we were singing that night. Amazing.
I'm so glad. Yeah, that was a mountaintop experience for me as well, because it was a joint conference of the Hymn Society and the Organ Historical Society. So the entire room was echoing with sound. It was amazing. And then to have the Notre Dame Children's Choir as our onstage choir, oh my gosh, it was just so magical. And of course the hall, the Meyerson Symphony Center, and the organ there, just a dream. The whole thing was just like a perfect storm of great elements that made congregational song just magical.
Amazing. Before we finish up, if anybody wants to put a question or a comment into the chat, please do so. I do want to call attention. Ken Lowenberg put in chat that just remarking on the fascinating background you have in music, church, and organ, and mentioning that he's your cousin at some level, third, fourth, or fifth. Did you know that before?
I had some idea, but thanks, Ken, for reminding me. And I do have to say, I married into this name, so I'm not a blood cousin, but I tell you what, the Kraybills are a wonderful clan. That name that he put in the chat is spelled a little different from mine. Mine is Kraybill, but they say that we all go back to a family name called Kraybill. which is a Swiss-German name. And so, yes, I'm very proud to be part of the Kraybill clan.
That's pretty cool. And Paul put in, thank you for the transformative sharing of your journey with music in our lives. And that's true. I mean, I think the word transformative sort of expresses a lot what you've had to say to us today. And it's really very inspiring.
Well, thank you. And that's actually what the Hymn Society is to me. Those I've mentioned a few names, but there are hundreds of encounters, both online and in textbooks and in hymnals, and then in person, that the Hymn Society has brought about for me. I'm designing, or I have co-designed a hymn festival that's going to happen this next Sunday on the 21st. And I was just putting together the acknowledgements page and the copyright page.
Mm-hmm.
And just to read the names that I now can say I've talked to that person or I'm friends with that person, it's truly amazing. Such a gift, such a gift.
It really is. It's an amazing community of people.
It is. Yeah.
Well, one last thing I'd like to ask before we have end is what would be your fondest dream for the Hymn Society going forward?
So one of the things I think the Hymn Society has done really well is to break down borders. So there used to be musically what we called worship wars. I don't think worship wars occur anymore in the Hymn Society and in the churches of the members of Hymn Society that have embraced this inclusiveness musically. I would love to see us continue that. So I really want the Hymn Society to grow, not because of the society, but because the work is so important. And breaking down walls and borders is so needed in our world these days. So I would love to see us expand even more, not only stylistically, I think we've done that pretty well, but what about different expressions of faith, maybe even non-Christian expressions of faith, bringing together people who sing wherever they sing. We used to say when the Center for Congregational Song opened, people would say, well, what's that? Where's the center? And it was a virtual center. And we said congregational song is singing that happens whenever people congregate. And so that can be on a street corner, that can be at a time of intense grief, that can be in a time of intense celebration. I just would love for the Hymn Society to continue to grow what we perceive as congregational song to be and to help bring that message to the world. I've said this many, many times, but music can transform lives. It really can. And so I just want us to do that more and more and more.
So well said. Thank you, Jan, so much for that and for everything that you do and have done.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
Oh, thanks. And thanks for this time. This has been really, what a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it so much.
Well, me too. Thanks for your questions and thanks for your leadership. Yeah, I appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. I certainly have had a great time. So thanks. And we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Thanks, everybody.